in many ways, a lot of personal success in areas of my life, physical, spiritual, intellectual, where after seeing a track record of growth in those areas because of living intentionally, it's hard for me not to have a desire to teach and train that and to live that way.
If you want to maximize the impact of your leadership, there are two words that start with the letter I that you cannot ignore. The first is intentional, and the second is invest. I'm your host, Tim Spiker, and this is the Be Worth Following podcast, a production of the People Forward Network. On this show, we talk with exceptional leaders, thinkers, and researchers about what actually drives effective leadership across the globe and over time. You just heard from Josh Etress, Chief Operating Officer of Anchor Investments, a private real estate investment company committed to, and I quote, building America's most generous real estate company. One of the ways that Anchor is working towards this ideal is through their hospitality arm, Mission Hotels. Anchor purchases former churches and repurposes them as boutique hotels that give back to underserved communities. As an example, in 2022, Mission Hotels donated over 150,000 essential items, such as meals, showers, beds, and supplies, to those experiencing homelessness. Now, people don't typically associate purpose or generosity with the real estate industry, but after you hear Josh speak, you might just think differently. During our conversation, Josh talks about a simple, disciplined practice that helps us as leaders draw out the best in others. He also shares his perspectives and practices for living intentionally that can set us up for success not only at work, but also in life. Josh is a man of profound sayings, helpful quips, and memorable maxims, some of which were imparted to him by his mentors. And that is where we begin our conversation.
I'm going to share people who I actually know who have influenced me and I've spent time with. And then I'm going to share some authors or key leaders that I feel like shaped me in a different way from studying and learning from them. But I'll really speak back to my experience in college. And I had a leader in my life. His name was Kevin Dilbeck, who was really the first person to truly invest in my life. When I think about Kevin in particular, he was the first person to have me audit my schedule. So I was a sophomore in college and he said, you need to audit your calendar for a full week and look how you're spending your time. He was the first leader to give me really pointed feedback and to tell me where I could grow and develop, which was very painful as a 19-year-old, but it was actually really good for me. And then he was the first leader to teach me how to set goals, to ask myself, where am I now? Where do I want to go? What's the next best step? And so I would attribute my early growth as a leader to him, followed up with the leader of Campus Outreach Birmingham and the ministry out of Birmingham, a leader named Olin Stubbs. And he influenced me a lot as well, Tim. He was the first person to teach me about using a 24-hour day of prayer and evaluation. So actually getting away out in the wilderness if I had to. Sometimes it'd be the third floor of a library, but truly getting away and thinking through and evaluating my life. He had me build my own job description. So every time I would be looking for new opportunities, he would be like, what do you want to do here? And I would get to do more of that. This one may sound interesting to some, but he said, hey, Josh, you need to learn to smile more. You're serious. You know what you think. You have a plan. And he's like, and if you just smile more often around more people, you're going to have a better experience.
Now, see, the listeners can't see you right now, but I want to say you took him up on his advice. You're crushing it in the smiling department.
Those two leaders. And then I have two more. I'm happy to share about them. When I moved out of ministry into the business world, the chief operating officer of a company called Wild Spark's name was Justin Harris. And he really prepared me to be a chief operating officer today. So one of the things he said often and taught me often is, it's not about you. It was just a phrase that he spoke regularly into my life. And that really helped me understand in any situation, I needed to make sure I'm not focused on myself. I'm focused on others. That was really critical. He taught me about systems thinking, the idea that if you show me your habits, I'll show you your future. And he really developed me in that way. He taught me how to deal with conflict and hard conversations. And he always said, calm is contagious. And that really stuck with me. One story in particular that does come to mind is we were in the office and we were talking about optimism. And I thought I was pretty optimistic. I could see the bright side of things. And I said, Justin, where do you think I am on a scale of 1 to 10? If 10 is being most optimistic and 1 is being most pessimistic. And he's like, you're a 4 on your best day. Now, looking back, I'm so happy that he shared that with me. I went back in my office and I remember thinking, I'll never make it as a leader if I'm a 4. on my best day. And I put together a growth plan on how I was going to grow, books I would read, people I would talk to, ways to grow, and seeing the bright side. And now I think most people in my life would say I'm one of the most optimistic person that they know.
Wow. And that's also a testament to the idea of growing and developing in the core components of who we are. Because a lot of people would say, optimism, is that something that you can really work on? And I'm like, well, here's Josh's plan and it worked. So yes.
It's a skill. Making money is a skill. Dealing with conflict is a skill. A lot of things people think are innate, I actually believe are skills that you can develop and layer those in. And then the last leader is actually my current CEO. He has had a real big impact on my life. And one, just thinking about unreasonable generosity that goes far above and beyond what you normally expect. Talks about never paying tuition twice. You want to capture every lesson and make sure you don't repeat it. And then the last one is the idea of leading with curiosity, asking questions and understanding what people are really asking you or what they really want. Because in our industry, there are a lot of negotiations. You're working on commercial real estate deals, you're working on leases, you're working on any variety of things that require you to truly understand the position of your future partner. And so when you actually begin to understand what their position is and how you can move towards them, you can create much better deals in our business landscape.
One of the things that I'm thinking of as I'm listening to you, Josh, is that there are cars across the country and around the world that are currently pulling over and getting out a pen and a piece of paper because there were about 10 phrases you dropped in there as you were talking about those people that are just wonderful 3-word phrases that represent a big idea to hold on to, that you have held on to in your life, and tells a whole story. And in the time that I have listened to you, you are consistent in this. You have worked hard to clarify really important ideas into short phrases. And I hope everybody's listening with a pen and paper in hand, because these are really golden ideas. But it also says just a little bit about packaging. I don't want to live at the surface level, but how do we remember and articulate things to others as we're developing them in such a way that they could recall this and lean into it? Because if it takes 27 sentences to get to the core of an idea, it's pretty unlikely that I'm going to pull it out in a moment and use it in the meeting where it needs to be used. So I love this habit that you have of here's the 3-word phrase, here's the big idea behind it, and I've got that baby committed to memory, and I share it with the people that I develop.
Thanks for sharing. And I will speak to an additional mentor, because Pastor Harry Reeder, who actually just passed away in Birmingham this past week, underneath his leadership, he taught me that your ability to package something in a memorable way would really impact the way you could teach and train others. And so I actually have curated a list, and I keep track of, and I've asked other people for their what I'll call collections of maxims. That way I can keep that updated and continue to learn and grow. And that's been big for me. And he did that better than anyone I know. I feel like if I can do 10% of what he's done, I'll be in a great place in life. And so that's where that actually came from.
It's a wonderful habit. And what I can say for sure, and people will hear this as we continue on in the conversation, but there are some people that latch on to maxims and phrases, and it goes no further than that. These are maxims and phrases that have ended up in your life as actions and habits and practices. And so this is not a discussion about the veneer of things that sound great, but this is, in my observation, because you cannot tell the stories in detail that Josh shares without having really lived it out. And so that's where maxims become really valuable, because when they're hollow, who cares? But when they're the real deal, it's a wonderful thing. So you mentioned that there were a couple of authors or books that fell into this category for you as well. Share with us about who that might be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a person of faith. And so you're going to have books that come from a spiritual perspective that have shaped me, and you're going to have books that come from a business perspective. So from a business perspective, authors like Daniel Coyle and Angela Duckworth, Liz Wiseman, Chip and Dan Heath, James Clear. We can go down the list. These authors really did shape the way I think and operate. And I'm happy to list some of those books and process those, but I have a list of books I'll give new leaders in our organization. And I'll say, if you want to understand how I think about business, start with these 5 books. One of those would be Grit, The Power of Passion and Perseverance by Angela Duckworth. Second one would be Atomic Habits by James Clear. I'm certain everyone knows of the book. If they haven't read it, but that's going to shape a lot of the way I think and lead. There's a book titled Switch: How People Change When Change is Hard by Chip and Dan Heath. And they also wrote a book, The Power of Moments. And those two books in combination are an excellent way to view and think through life and engagement and change, especially leading other people. And then I would add Daniel Coyle's book, The Culture Code, to that list, which is significant as well. So those are a few multipliers by Liz Wiseman. I think that's amazing for any leader to read. And then on the spiritual perspective, you give me a book by Tim Keller, Every Good Endeavor, How to Think About My Spiritual Life at Work. If you give me sermons, usually Charles Spurgeon and Martin Lloyd-Jones and Jerry Bridges and Pastor Reeder, and most of those people have passed away, but their work is still very, very valuable.
Out of the faith side that you just mentioned, are there any particular titles that you would put down from any of those authors that you just mentioned?
Some of these are like 101, 201, 301, but yes, those are significant. I would consider Respectable Sins by Jerry Bridges. That comes to mind. I would think about the Sermon on the Mount. That's about a 650-page book. It's every sermon Martin Lloyd-Jones did. Those come to mind immediately, and those are books I highly recommend.
I want to dig into some of the ways you lead, but I think a good place to start is to talk a little bit about where you are right now. You're the COO of Anchor Investments. Let's talk about what you guys do as an organization, and let's start with the role you're in as COO right now.
My role primarily is to come alongside our CEO, who is a visionary, and help accelerate our business. So some of your listeners may be familiar with Traction or EOS, the Entrepreneur Operating System, where you have a visionary and you have an integrator. I serve as the integrator. I'm going to make sure we manage our P&L, that I'm dealing with cross-functional conflict and communication. I'm going to be the person that's providing tremendous amounts of leadership, management, and accountability to our leadership team. And that is really the primary role that I play in our business. Now, there's a number of other things I get to do, casting vision alongside our CEO, building big picture relationships, but he's going to have more responsibility in that area. And then I'm going to have more in the areas that I mentioned. So that's what I get to do. Our corporate purpose is similar to that of Chick-fil-A, is to glorify God by being a faithful steward of all that's been entrusted to us. Now, our vision is to build America's most generous real estate company, redeeming commercial real estate one team member experience and property at a time. We do that through commercial real estate or value-add retail, and then we have hotels that are actually built out of old churches, and we're able to give back over half the profits to people experiencing homelessness in the areas where those hotels are located.
So there's a whole lot of purpose going on at Anchor Investments in a variety of different ways. And you're combining that with the words commercial real estate, which is not often combined. To be as intentional and purposeful as you just shared there in those last couple of minutes, it makes for a very unique company who literally has the word investments in the title of the organization. This is a unique place.
It really is. And I also want to be kind to the industry. There are others who would describe commercial real estate as a den of thieves. So I want to be careful with that. I don't believe that's always true, but I believe it has been true at times. And a lot of the ways we think about business is we say, what do people hate about how business is done? We're going to do the opposite. What is frustrating people? What drives them insane? Even in our hotel business, we say, what do you not like about hotels? Well, I don't want to pay for Wi-Fi and $8 for a bottle of water. And you go down the list, and we just do the opposite. Free parking, free Wi-Fi, free snacks. And you can really reverse engineer a lot of businesses by saying, what drives me insane about that?
So what do you say to somebody along those lines from a financial and strategic standpoint? They said, yeah, okay, that sounds awesome, but you just gave away a lot of revenue, or you just cost yourself a lot of money.
Let's use the example of the Chick-fil-A sauce. So when you pull through Zaxby's and you ask for an extra sauce, they're going to tack on 50 cents for every sauce that you add. But when you go through Chick-fil-A, if you ask for 60 sauces, they'll put 60 sauces in your bag. And so the goodwill that's associated with the minor cost of us providing those things makes for incredibly loyal customers who rave about you online and offline. And so therefore, the idea that we'd be losing out on revenue, it doesn't match up with what actually happens when you treat people that way and you make your guest the hero.
Yeah. I had no idea that we were going to get into this space today, but it's reminding me of something. I was having a conversation with a fellow business owner, and she was proud of her business, but they do things very generously. They do things not what might be the typical thing that's taught in an MBA program. And as we're talking about, hey, when you own the business, you can run it any way you want to. And if you decide that what you want to do is give away free sauces, guess what you get to do? And even within the limits of the controls that you have in most organizations, there are some spaces where you can say, you know what? I can do the math like Ebenezer Scrooge and say, hey, every penny. But ultimately, to be able to say to ourselves, what's at the heart of how I want to lead, how I want to show up, how I want to engage with people, how I want to take care of clients, it could be that message that's coming through your heart is the very same thing that's going to create loyal customers, that's going to create loyal employees, and may not be exactly how you save 10 cents here and 3 cents there. Maybe there's a different equation, and it's worth listening to that intuition that you have inside of you. So I think you're working in a unique place. Now, being unique doesn't mean that Anchor Investments doesn't have pain points and challenges. And so just to further fill out the context in which you lead, talk with us a little bit about some of the bigger pain points and challenges that the organization is looking at right now. What's the rock in the shoe that you guys are trying to solve for these days?
I think there'd be two challenges I'll speak to, perhaps a third. One is something that's outside of our control. And so we want to be aware of it. We want to think for it. We want to prepare for it. However, we aren't the one dictating the decisions that are being applied to us. And that would be the broader economic climate and the Federal Reserve's interest rates. And so that's something that we can think about, but we can't allow it to dictate the way we move forward, or we have to process perhaps differently because of that. So you can imagine in a very tight lending environment where even a year and a half ago, anyone who wanted a loan could get a loan for about anything they wanted. And now you're in an environment where even someone who's extremely well capitalized is struggling to get loans with a track record of success. And so that's made us think differently about our relationships, our connections, building out broader and deeper relationships in the banking industry and how we might go about that. So that comes to mind. Secondly, more than half our team has been with Anchor less than 2 years. So we've grown really rapidly, but that means almost everyone or more than half the team is new to the team. And that comes with a unique set of challenges because you're regularly onboarding people, you're building new processes, you're building out new departments, and you're trying to drive home a new version of the vision, mission, values. And that comes with its own challenges. And then the third is what I'm preparing our team for is to say, hey, as our revenue doubles and our headcount doubles, my theory is that every time your headcount doubles or your revenue doubles, every system in your organization breaks. And that really has to help us think through it. And I let our team know in advance, a lot of things are going to break in the next 12 months and even more will break in the following 12 months. And that's okay. How do we take the number of properties that we currently manage and operate and own? And if there are 3 times as many, what systems are going to break first? And so we try to stay ahead of that by asking ourselves questions about what's going to break next that we can prepare for in advance. And those are the 3 challenges that I feel most right now as a chief operating officer.
Well, given all that, and especially the quality you described there with so many new team members, what are some of the things that Anchor Investments is doing to systematically develop leaders within the organization, even in the midst of this really fast growth?
Number one, every summer I sit down and have a 90-minute dream session with every single employee. Now, this year we've gotten bigger, and so we'll break that out and we'll let other members of the team lead those. But that's going to give you a sense of where every employee is. What are their desires for the next 3 years? What have they learned most in the past 12 months? And so we leave those with an opportunity for them to build a crystal clear action plan of their growth and development for the next 12 months. I will provide avenues for growth. I have taken all of our leaders through a 6-week training that I built called 100X Leadership. And so we'll do cohorts where we bring them through, teach them how do I think about leading others? How do I think about leading myself? That's a component of that as well. And then the best way that I've developed leaders, and perhaps it's not systematic, but if there's anyone on the team who is doing something 70% as well as I can do it, I'm going to delegate it to them. They have to have momentum moving forward. We're going to delegate it to them, and we're going to say, hey, you have an opportunity to own this and think for this and do that in a really compelling and exciting way. And I think that's developed our team more than almost anything else.
One of the things I want to point out to our listeners as we're hearing from you is that you are in the COO integrator role. Here's why I think that's so important. Sometimes when we think about some of these people development issues, we have a tendency to think about that as off to the side, nice to have, hope we can get there. But to be able to hear the passion and intentionality that you talk about these types of things from the COO integrator role, the numbers better work out. So to be able to have somebody like yourself that is so involved in the very nuts and bolts of business, but to also have the organizational and cultural and leadership passions that you do and to be engaged. You just heard Josh talking about a 6-week program. He created it and then brought it in for the leaders of the organization, and that's unique. So I just think it's important that as we get to hear the rest of what we're going to hear from you today, that we remember that we're hearing this not from the visionary CEO role, not from the HR person who spent their whole life dealing in with people, but from somebody who sits in the most blocking and tackling seat in the organization, who is also showing up with passion about culture and commitment to values and care for leaders. And I'm so glad for people to get to hear about this, particularly from you, Josh.
Well, and Tim, our company's only as good as the leaders we hire and the leaders we develop. And so you may hear this later in our conversation, but I treat every person today like the leader I expect them to be 3 years from today. Because we're growing at a faster rate than our ability to hire or bring on leaders, and they have to accelerate their growth in the same way. And to me, that's very exciting. I don't want to call them out. I want to call them up and set expectations for them that maybe no one else ever has. And to me, that's a tremendous amount of fun.
Yeah. Well, I know there's 2 big topics we're going to dive into deeply today, and let's go ahead and get to that first one. And it's the concept of intentional living. Talk to us about why that idea is so important from your perspective.
Well, I think a phrase I use often is you'll never drift to your desired destination. And when I look around at the culture that I grew up in as a millennial, and I look around, I spent 6 years with college students right out of college in campus ministry. And my observation is that there were a lot of people who were drifting through life. No aim, no direction. They were in college because someone told them they needed to go to college. There was no real thought behind the actions that they were taking. And so the world was dictating how they lived their life instead of them dictating to the world what their life would be. So in order to live an intentional life, you have to understand, what is my destination? Where do I want to go? Where am I now? And what's the next best step? I've had great leaders who've instilled that into me. And I've also seen, in many ways, a lot of personal success in areas of my life: physical, spiritual, intellectual, relational, family, financial, where after seeing a track record of growth in those areas because of living intentionally, it's hard for me not to have a desire to teach and train that and to live that way. And it starts with me. I have to do that well, and it's a constant battle.
Well, it really begins with a worldview and a belief system that leans into the idea of agency, which is to say, no matter what cards you've been dealt in life, you get to play the hand. And there's always the stories of people who have started out not with all of the advantages in a variety of different ways, but they didn't use that as an excuse. They said, okay, what can I do? And this idea of intentional living, I think, leans right into that for the betterment of all those folks. So let's talk about some of the core maxims that you have yourself and try to share with others around this idea of intentional living.
Number one is action creates traction. So whenever you feel stuck or you feel like you're not making progress, you have to drive activity. Even if it's in the wrong direction at first, it will get you out of the rut. Visibility creates accountability. The idea that I can make something visible in front of others and with others, that's going to accelerate my growth. The idea that growth happens best in the context of community. I never want to grow alone. I want to grow with and alongside others. The idea that you own what you create. And early in my career, I wanted to get things from other people to make it faster. But I found that if I invite my team members, they create the plan and they own the plan. They're far more likely to be intentional with how that plan is executed, how it works, how it functions. There's this idea in my mind that no one will do it for you. And a big part of your job is to treat the job you have today like it's the best and last job you'll ever have. And if you do that, you'll never run out of opportunities when it comes to your work and to your relationships and to the way that you go about your business.
Let's talk about some of these examples. This could be from your own life or from the lives of others that you've observed. But when it comes to this idea of success and failure in intentional living, as you apply things like action creates traction and visibility creates accountability and you own what you create, what are some things in a tangible example standpoint that you've seen from others or in your own life?
I'll speak to my own life, my own experience. So I think about even one area is the idea of having healthy rhythms and healthy habits. I'll speak to failure first. There was a time where I could reset my life every 6 months. What rhythms do I want to have in place? How do I want to spend my mornings? How do I want to handle my evening routine? What does my growth plan look like? What are my goals? And that worked really well. And it wasn't until we had our 4th child in October that I found myself getting frustrated because 2 to 3 months into that exercise, I would be off track. And I had a mentor who I called. I said, hey, how do you stay on track? I'm feeling like I'm not on track. And he said, Josh, when you have 4 kids, 8 and under, you have to reset your rhythms every 2 months, not every 6 months. He's like, you have a new nap schedule. You have a new schedule for your kids' practices. You have new schedules for their schooling, for the things they're involved in. And that actually is both a failure and an opportunity to grow. The idea that I need to pay attention to the environment I'm in and not apply every lesson to every time period of my life and be willing to adjust in that area. So the second one is the idea of never missing twice. It's okay if I miss. I've lifted weights 3 times a week for 16 straight weeks, but I missed on Tuesday because I went to my mentor's funeral, but I wasn't going to miss on Wednesday. I'm a big fan of apps that help me stay aligned. One very simple app, it's called Streaks. And so you can actually use Streaks to input things that you want to accomplish on a daily or weekly basis, and you can mark them off. And it can give you a sense of where you are in any of those daily activities, weekly activities, or monthly activities. And if I can stay 80 to 90% of that, I'm living a great life. So I give myself a lot of grace, and I give other people a lot of grace. But it's the idea if you set a big, hairy, audacious goal, that even if you come 10% short, it could be significantly more than what you would have done otherwise.
Yeah, those are great examples and so many things I could follow up that with just to point out that are so excellent. But one of the things is the idea of excellence. When you talk about here's where I'm trying to get, and if I can get 80 to 90% of that, and just right in the midst of that comment, Josh, is the fight against perfectionism. I know not everybody in the world struggles with perfectionism. I recognize it and try not to be there. I think it's a wonderful lesson to say that we can strive to have an intentional life. We can strive to maximize what our capability is. Was that something that was just natural to you, or did you have to learn that over time?
I had to learn that over time. There's a book called The Gap and the Gain by Dr. Benjamin Hardy. And so for leaders of businesses or nonprofits or organizations, most of your listeners are very driven people. There's this idea that we have goals and we have an ideal state that we believe we should be at. And that ideal state is always getting kicked out further. We achieve A and then it's B. We achieve B and then it's C. And so we measure ourselves against our ideal, which we've never achieved. And we're living in the gap. And it causes frustration. It causes us to be angry. It causes us to be upset. There's all types of emotions that are driven when we measure against our ideal. But when we measure against where we were in the past and we say, what all has happened in the last 3 months or 6 months or 12 months, that creates an extreme level of confidence. The idea that I'm always winning. And instead of measuring against what I didn't do, I just measure against where I was in the past. And that gives me a high degree of confidence and excitement and joy and passion for what I do. And that book really did shape the way that I processed my goals against what I was accomplishing.
Very good. The Gap and the Game by Dr. Benjamin Hardy, and I believe also Dan Sullivan is a co-author on that one as well. Let's get to the other thing that is a big passion point for you, investing in others. How did you have that become such a value for you, and how are you doing that today?
Answering the first question, I became a Christian in college. That radically altered my life. And the idea of multiplying your life through others is all throughout the scriptures and all throughout the Bible, that Jesus actually had his biggest impact by investing in 12 men, 500 more broadly than that. And so that's what I learned early on from the people that were leading me, is that if I invest in others, that's actually the way. That's how you achieve success. That's how you grow. That's how you develop, is by investing and multiplying your life in and through others. And the concept of do for one what you wish you could do for all. That's really where it started. And then through that, moving out of full-time ministry into business, I realized that the applications for this were not only reserved for the church, but they were available to be accessed and used and utilized in the business domain. And that's been huge for me.
Well, let's talk about that, because it's really interesting. You have a faith background that informs that and has moved you forward, and then you have your own experiences where you've gotten a chance to experience that. But let's say that I'm a younger up-and-coming leader who doesn't have that same faith background and perspective that you do, and yet you're saying this is a key concept in leading effectively, investing in others. How do you talk to somebody like me who doesn't necessarily share that background with you if you believe this is also a principle that applies well really in any organization?
I'll speak from my own experience. As somebody who had a deep desire for control, so coming out of adolescence, I had a deep desire for success and achievement. I had a deep desire for the approval of others. Seeking those things out actually created more harm and more damage than flipping it in reverse or turning it upside down. True success comes when I give up control and I put other people in control. True success is when I position other people to have their greatest achievements, where they're the one who did the work. So anytime my team does something successful, I want to point to them and say, it was you. I didn't create the plan. You created it. I may have asked you some questions and helped refine it, but you did the work. And then instead of seeking the approval of others, I seek out the opportunity to give approval to others, to tell them how great they're doing, how wonderful it is to see them be successful, how excited I am for their future, how much I believe in them. When you take yourself out of the equation and you make it about others, both parties win. And the byproduct of that is that our organization grows and the opportunities for everyone grows.
So let's say if I don't share your faith background, that explanation makes sense to me, and yet I still struggle to invest in others. I still struggle to do it. What do you think's the number one thing or a handful of things that keep leaders from investing more in others than they do?
Number one, time. It's the idea that I don't have 30 minutes to coach this person or train this person or develop this person. It would be significantly faster if I just do this on my own. Because if you're a president or you're in the C-suite, you generally have a sense of urgency about the way you go about your life and your business and your goals. Therefore, investing in this person that may take time, they need to figure it out on their own. However, you're not thinking about future time. You're not thinking about the idea of time out in the distance, that if I actually spend 50 minutes coaching and developing this person now, I'm going to bank 5 hours of time in the future, or 50 hours or 500 hours in the future because of that. And so the idea of time banking becomes really critical. Most of your listeners are savvy enough to know that you have to invest for the long run. They understand the idea of exponential growth or the law of compounding. What is difficult, though, is to recognize that anything that takes you 5 minutes to do, you almost have to train someone else 5 times that long. If it takes you 2 hours, 10 hours of training, but the long run is you're going to get hundreds and hundreds of hours back.
One of the real challenges that exists for leaders in publicly traded companies is this 90-day cycle that we have. This pressure to report to Wall Street, this ever-increasing result, every long-term investment you have to do in spite of the current demands, in spite of the numbers that are about to get reported. And of course, organizations are making capital expenditures all the time, but especially when you think about the personal time and energy investment that you're talking about. We are so challenged everywhere, but especially in publicly traded organizations who have to produce these numbers every 90 days. And so the diligence and the commitment to be able to look ahead, to look at the longer view and say, I'm going to make this investment even though I don't feel like I can, but I'm going to try to look at 5 years down the road, even though I may not get immediately rewarded for that.
Tim, I have a general rule in life that I live by. I say days and decades. I need to focus really on what needs to happen today and the next 90 days, and then I want to think about 10 years from now. Anytime I get stuck thinking about a year or 2 years or 3 years, anxiety, fear, worry, concern creeps in. What do I need to do today so that we're where we need to be 10 years from now? And that has really helped me because I believe a lot of those decisions at publicly traded companies, I will be fair to say I've only worked in private companies. I imagine that'll be the case for the rest of my career. But my sense is that many of those decisions are being made out of fear. Fear that they won't hit certain numbers or certain timelines or certain metrics. And they're not actually driven out of a true care and concern for the consumer or the stakeholders. They're focused on the shareholders, but not all the stakeholders.
I ask, what are some of the things that keep leaders from making these investments in others? Top of the list is time. Is there anything else that you think of comes into play and is a roadblock for leaders when it comes to the idea of investing in others?
I think there can be an element of pride that no one else can do it like me, which is a natural feeling. I've felt that many times in my career. I felt that this morning. And I think there has to be an element where you get outside of yourself. Like my mentor said, Josh, it's not about you. And the more I remind myself of that, the more I'm willing to set aside my pride and actually believe there are others who can be far more capable and enjoy it far more than I do. And so there are tasks that I've held on to for far too long instead of investing in people and developing them that I didn't even personally enjoy. There's someone else out there who loved it. They'd be thrilled to do it. The third one is a lot of people have never been trained how to develop other people. And so it's unfair to say that it's just pride or just time. The concept of investing in other people could be truly, in many ways, new to them. They may have figured it out without mentors. Maybe they were so ambitious, they didn't have those people in their life. And so they found a way. It's a bit of a foreign idea to think that I can truly multiply my efforts by investing in people, and then much less how to do it, or what I call the cycle of training. Tell them why, show them how, do it with them, let them do it, launch to reproduce. Well, 10 years ago, I'd never heard of that in my life. It's possible that they haven't had the opportunity to learn what does it look like for me to invest in others.
Good word on all of that. All right, so as you share that, have people actually been trained and developed to invest in others? One of the words that comes attached to that so easily is the idea of coaching. What's your perspective on coaching, how it works best? What could you share with us around being really great at coaching to invest in others?
Well, Tim, I feel incredibly blessed because when I became the second non-founding hire at WildSpark, this is in 2017, first sales hire for a startup growth SaaS company in Birmingham, about 6 months in, they gave me access to an executive coach. And at the time, perhaps I thought, oh, this is great. They must really think highly of me. But also I now recognize I had a lot of issues I needed to deal with. I was fascinated by that experience because the coach drew things out of me and called me to more in a way that very few people have. And so I started to explore, should I get certified as a coach? This is just so awesome, so encouraging. But instead, I called the coach and I said, if I only read 3 books on coaching others, what would they be? And would that give me 90% of what you do? And he said it would. Now, you need years of practice, but if you read these 3 books, it would work. One was called The Coach Model by Keith Webb. The second one is called Coaching for Breakthrough Success. And then the third one is Coaching with Backbone and Heart. So you have 101, 201, 301. And then I realized my ability as we grew and scaled that business to hire and coach new people on our team would be the differentiator on whether or not we made it or not. Our product had to be great, but our people had to be great. So the idea of reframing every challenge as an opportunity to grow, that failure leads to innovation or desperation, and that we're going to say, we know we're going to face challenges, but I'm here to help address the breadth and the depth of those challenges and help people come out healthier and better on the other side. And I absolutely love that.
What are a couple of principles that come to mind as you think about the things that you took away from those books and are now applying?
One question I ask my team members often is they'll bring me a problem or they have an opportunity to process a problem. And I'll often ask them, if you were your own coach, what would you tell yourself? And it's amazing the amount of clarity and ownership and buy-in that comes out of that conversation. The way you ask questions and the way that you allow them to come to their own conclusions and their own solutions, instead of me dictating down at them, do this. As a coach, I'm going to draw out the best in them. There's two ways that I think about one-on-ones. That's where coaching happens the most. One is the vivid method. And so for me, coaching people, I let every team member vent to me for 5 minutes about absolutely anything, sometimes 10 minutes. After that, you're grumbling and complaining, so we don't go any further than that. Do they need information from me? Okay, that helps me understand what they need. Do they need me to validate or verify their idea? That would be big. Do they need to ideate with me? And then lastly, do they need a decision from me? And that's the one I hold back the most. I will do it when it brings them a lot of relief or they're in a tight spot, but very rarely do I decide for them. That would be the first framework. The second one in those one-on-ones is I just always ask the same 4 questions. Personal morale, scale of 1 to 10. And then I follow up with tell me more. Team morale, scale of 1 to 10, tell me more. Where are you experiencing progress? Everyone wants to feel like they're winning. And then where are you facing challenges, if any, and how can I support you?
So many things to pull out of that, but let me just reflect something back to you. The openness to be able to roll with somebody else's idea, to be able to ask the question, and the resistance of being the answer leader, to have your identity as a leader in the answer. Both of those, in my opinion, are rooted in the same quality, and that is humility. Can I, as a leader, have enough humility to champion not only somebody else's idea, but the idea of people who report to me? Does it have to be my idea? And can I resist the idea of being the answer person? A lot of us have moved forward in our careers because we were the answer person. We figured it out, that we became known for that, and our identity is in that. And now we think as leaders, that's our primary job, and it's not. Our primary job as leaders is to multiply the capabilities of other people so we can all win more. But it can become such an identity thing for any of us. I think the key behind both of those ideas that you were sharing is humility. And that's a tough thing to go after for any of us. But I applaud you moving in that direction because that is such an enabler to so many things, Josh.
Well, I'm thankful. My wife, she's an unbelievable leader, and she has truly taught me what it looks like to live a humble life. And as many times through just brokenness of the ways I've led poorly, my life experiences have prepared me for this. So thankfully, you're interviewing me now, 13, 14 years into my career, not 3 or 4 years into my career, where oftentimes I believe I was leaving a wake of damage in people's lives. I don't feel that I was actually leading to the same degree. And hopefully for those of you who are listening and you feel like, I can't do this, I've been struggling, I've been bombing, I've been ruining things, you can shift gears. You can point to your desired destination and leave a wake of impact of people's lives that have been transformed and changed. And to me, it's always critical to remember people can develop and can grow no matter where they are at in their life. Does not matter. I will always be a develop first leader, not a replace first leader. Yes, there are times where people need to be replaced, but I will always seek to develop first.
So here is what I'm wondering today as we wrap up. Do you have any ink left in your pen? I cannot imagine how you would have been able to keep up with all of the ideas and maxims and perspectives that Josh shared with us that were so valuable. What a fun and invigorating conversation that was. There are a couple of things that I want to hit on here as we wrap up. And they're really the two major things that Josh talked about there towards the end. The idea of investing in others and intentional living. I'm going to start with investing in others. Now, we talked about the business case. We talked about the idea of multiplying, and I have to invest in order to enable others, but ultimately that increases the entire capacity of the organization. So that's the business case for saying that we need to be very intentional about investing in the development of others because it's going to increase the capacity of the organization if we do that consistently over time and if we lead the organization to do that consistently over time. But there's an esoteric argument that I want to make here as well because leadership is hard. It's hard to have all of this responsibility all the time. And so there's got to be something that's satisfying in it that goes beyond the idea of compensation and bonuses. And I think there really is. And for that, I want to share a story. I want you to think about a time when you had a present for somebody that you were really excited about. You had planned, you knew it was perfect for them. And this is one of those presents where it took some time and energy from you. You weren't just 2 clicks on Amazon and it was done. You had to do more than that. You had to invest more time and energy, but you did. You stayed up all night and you put the thing together, or you wrote the 17 pages of notes that went into the special book that you were making for somebody, or whatever that particular gift required. The energy, the time, the thoughtfulness, you put in the hours and time. And I want you to think to the moment of when that person got to open that present. You see, it was for them. It was to care for and bless them. But do you remember the satisfaction that you got out of purely giving? You just wanted to do something great for that other person, and you did it. And there was an absolutely deep within you reward for having been so completely and purely others focused. And I want you to remember that when you think about investing in others. I want you to think about that esoteric satisfaction that comes from doing something purely for somebody else. Now, it's perhaps a little hard to do that in this context because I just made the business case, and Josh and I talked about the business case. There is something for you as the leader. There is something for the organization when you invest in the development of others. But I don't want us to forget the freedom that comes along with purely giving for the sake of supporting and developing somebody else. The business, the organization will be blessed by that effort for you as you multiply the capabilities of the organization. But there is a non-financial and very meaningful reward for us as leaders when we take the time and energy to invest in the development of others. And I don't want us to forget that today. The other thing is coming back to that other idea, the idea of intentionally living. One of the things that is true with every single leader that I have the opportunity to work with is there's not been a single leader who's ever said, yeah, I'm not busy, got plenty of time, no worries, all the time in the world, we can get everything done. The message is always the opposite of that. There is always way too little time to do the things that we need to do. And so what can get squeezed out is who we are as leaders. What can get squeezed out is this idea of a life that we're building and who we are trying to become, even as we are leading the organizations and the people that we are leading. And so intentional living is a way to take some of that control back, to say, I'm going to invest in me. If I don't set aside time for the things that are valuable to who I want to become, whether that be intellectually, relationally, spiritually, physically, if I don't set aside any of that time, I'm not going to drift towards becoming that great person that I want to be. And I will say this on top of it. It sounds perhaps a touch selfish, but the truth is, when I am at my greatest, when I am at my fullest and at my potential, the people I'm leading around me, they get a better version of me, and they will get a better version of you as well. So the idea of intentionally living is not just for me. It trickles into the lives of everybody around me. And so when I am the best version of who I am, because I am prioritizing time and energy to help become the best version of who I can be, it does have an impact on my leadership. It does have an impact on how I interact with others. It does have an impact on my confidence as I lead. And so this is such an important idea, and I'm so glad that Josh has such a passion about it. Not only does it himself, but shares ideas with others. And today shared that with you as our audience. And so that leads me to the question I want to leave you with today. And that is this: are you living an intentional life? I'm Tim Spiker, reminding you to be worth following and to follow us wherever you receive your podcasts. If you've heard something valuable today, please share our podcast with your friends and colleagues. And if you're up for it, leave us a 5-star review. Thanks for listening.